the February 24th in the morning, like it was played on all the major media, and he said, we've been left no choice. And I think it was sincere. Like, he literally was saying, like, they've left me no choice, guys. Like, I mean, like, what can I do? I mean, okay. Like, we're attacking. Fine. Okay. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. This video is devoted to the so-called mutiny of so-called a private military company of Wagner that happened in June 2023, which is like a little less than 2 months ago when I'm recording this. Okay, so what was it? Like, what was the goals? Were they achieved, etc., etc.? Well, in order to examine these questions, we firstly have to examine the structure of power in Russia, and I do mean the actual structure of power, if you know what I mean, conspiratorially speaking. Because again, many times on this channel I have said, it's not my idea, but I actually agree with it, that Russia is or was a British colony. Now it's more like a European colony in general, so more like Paris/Brussels type of colony. But still, as a British colony, Russia was governed more or less like Britain itself was. And how is Britain governed? The UK, I mean. Well, there are actually 3 branches, and again, it's sort of like a meta-narrative that I'm building here. It's not the formally how it works, but how it actually works, rather, okay? So there are 3 branches. The aristocratic branch, the democratic branch, and the monarchistic branch. Pretty much, and like, covering all of the Aristotle's, classical ways of governance. So the aristocratic branch is the administration, the government proper, the government in the narrow sense of the word, okay? So the ministries, essentially. Then the democratic branch, so these are professional bureaucrats, right? The democratic branch is the parliament. It's like the direct connection of the government to the people, if you wish. So it kind of controls, in popular vote style, what the administrative branch is doing. And the third branch that stabilizes the other 2 is the monarchy. It's the king / the queen, the whatever is in the throne right now. So, and you should expect that in their colony they would have something similar, okay? So, in case of Russia, what do we have? Aristocratic branch, it's kind of the same, the ministries, right? And the president, I should say. Democratic branch is the single party, pretty much, in Russia. They have more or less a single party system, just like China or USSR for that matter, the E.th.Ph party, which is like unified or united Russia, in translation. So imagine if the American Republican and Democratic Party were united into one. Well, this is E.th.Ph in Russia. So it was established in 2001 and was meant to solidify, kind of unify the political system, right? The Putin's rule, essentially. And interestingly enough, the current Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, or Sergei Shoigu, whatever you want to pronounce it in English, was one of the founders. There were 3 people who founded this party. And since then, he became the Minister of Defense in 2012. He's also involved in the mutiny, so that's why I'm kind of giving him some airtime here. And the funny thing about him, which like many people mock Russia with, is that he never served. So it's the Minister of Defense who has no experience of being a soldier at all. So it's kind of funny, even though it's kind of sad, actually, okay? Like, if Russia was an actual country, it would be extremely sad. But it's not, so it's kind of funny, rather. So, okay, so we have an aristocratic branch, we have the democratic branch, E.th.Ph and the bureaucracy. What is the third branch? Who is the monarch? That's a good question, right? Well, what a monarch requires is a dynasty, a family, if you wish. But if you look at the Russian leaders, they all have fake biographies, just like Soviet leaders had. Like, if you look at Stalin, if you look at Khrushchev, or whatever you like to call it. If you look at Brezhnev, they all had fake biographies. Like, Stalin is supposedly from Georgia, even though he couldn't speak Georgian. Like, his own mother didn't recognize him, etc., etc. So he was also like a British agent who initially was working in Persia. He's not from Georgia at all. So anyways, and the same with Khrushchev and Brezhnev. Like for Brezhnev, like his biography almost literally starts when he was 40 years old. So that's how fake it is. And Putin is also fake, just like them. I mean, he was a KGB officer, so most likely he is gay in the first place, just like many reconnaissance officers were and have been and still are, and KGB officers included. So, and he is actually so fake that the actress who played his wife divorced him in 2014, maybe you remember that, and she almost immediately remarried some other random dude actually in 2015. Like she said, okay, that's enough, guys, like I'm out of here, like this show has been on way too long, like I didn't subscribe to this. And it's actually funny to me to look at all the conservative, you know, Putin fans, like from places like the United States and other places, like again, well, look at it from your conservative type of lens. I mean, you conservative cuckolds, like, oh, a woman should be, you know, the first thing a man thinks about. Well, Putin is divorced, guys. Like, he's most likely gay in the first place. Like, what are you gonna say about that? Like, he's still not married after 9 years of divorce. So, yeah. So, okay, returning to the topic. Monarchy requires dynasty, as I've said, alright? And there's really only one dynasty that can be seen in Russia, in Russian Federation in the last decades. It's the Kadyrov family, Kadyrov, if you wish, the stupid English accent, from Chechnya, or Chechnya, with the accent. So, as you may remember, there have been the first Chechen war, so-called, under President Yeltsin, in 1994-1996, right? Which Russia kinda lost, actually. So Chechnya was still a pretty unstable region, unstable in the sense that it was kind of against Russian Federation, right? Technically it was still part of the Federation, but really not really, you know. So Putin came actually to power as the unificator, you know, the pacificator of Chechnya, among other things. So there have been false flag attacks on Russian civilians in 1999. Like some apartment buildings were bombed by, you know, Russian intelligence. In Moscow, in Volgodonsk, in one other city, I think. So, like the meme of sugar from Ramzan appeared there, Ryazansky Sakhar, which means like these buildings were bombed with like bags of RDX, which is a hexogen, right? So RDX looks like sugar. So some people noticed that mysterious, you know, vans were unloading bags of sugar into these buildings, and later they've exploded. So it became kind of a meme. But yeah, a lot of people died, and this was a formal, like, you know, a terrorist attack on Russia from Chechens, even though, well, I mean, it could have been Chechens, but it was definitely a false flag attack by the Russian intelligence. So, here comes the second Chechen war, and it's kind of like Iraq, you know, like 9/11 was predated by 2 years with Russians. They did the same thing, like they bombed their own buildings and then invaded Chechnya again. So, the current leader of Chechnya is Ramzan Kadyrov, okay? And he is a son of former chief mufti, so a priest, you know, Islamic priest, Ahmad Kadyrov. Who unironically, when Russians have invaded Chechnya during the second Chechen war, already Putin was prime minister back then, I think. So he was kind of leading the operation. So, Ramzan Kadyrov, unironically declared jihad on Russia in 1999. But then, when he saw that Russians were actually better this time, under Putin, he switched sides, and later on, when the Russians have won, they've made him a president of Chechnya. He was assassinated, though, by some Chechen radicals in 2004. And after that, his son became the president sometime around 2007, and he's still the president of Chechnya. That is Ramzan Kadyrov. Actually, that was Ahmad Kadyrov, the Mufti who was assassinated. Now it's Ramzan Kadyrov, but it's his son, okay? He was the head of his father's militia, his kind of bodyguard, you know, the most trusted guy. And he's quite famous for bragging about killing, I quote, his first Russian when he was 16 years old, etc., etc. So, and both him and his father, who declared jihad on Russia, are heroes of the Russian Federation. So you might see that there is quite a bit of cuckoldry on the side of Russian Federation, right? They're being humiliated by Chechens. And yet they're pouring an insane amounts of money into Chechnya. And a lot of people are upset with this, but everyone kind of understands why that is the case, like on an intuitive level. Like, Chechens are perceived almost like superhumans in Russia, at least by the administration. So they're given everything they want pretty much. There's only 1.5 million of Chechens versus almost 140 million in Russian Federation. Yet Chechens are definitely a privileged class in the whole federation. So they receive insane amounts of funding. They get, again, they're killing Russians, they're declaring jihad on Russians, they still get all kinds of privileges, the hero medals, etc., etc. Why? Well, exactly, like, I think you see already, right? Because Chechnya is the monarch's domain, right? It's like in the UK, many people are upset that the royal family gets all this funding and all these privileges, but I mean, it's the monarchy, right? It's a so-called sovereign grant. That's what they call the payments to the monarchy in the UK. Well, it's kind of the sovereign grant for the Russian monarchy, the actual Russian monarchy, aka Kadyrov's family, the royal family of Russia. And in general, like, what was this anti-terrorist? By the way, it wasn't called war. It was called anti-terrorist operation, and that's what made Putin really famous. That's what gave him presidency like a year later. So it was this counter-terrorist operation in Chechnya. You can already see the seeds, right? How war in Ukraine is not called war, but rather special military operation. It was kind of the same thing. And it's, in general, the thing was kind of an example of British humor, right? When Britain shows you China annexing Hong Kong, like what is really happening. And I think I've made this point in my video about China, perhaps, but nevertheless, I'm going to link it anyways, that it wasn't China annexing Hong Kong, but it was Hong Kong annexing China, like what happened a few years back, actually. By the same token, it wasn't Chechnya annexed by Russia, but it was Russia annexed by Chechnya. Mysteriously, actually, but in reality, okay? So now we have the complete picture. We have aristocracy in Russia, being led by Putin and his bureaucrats, okay? We have the democracy branch, spearheaded by Shoigu, the Minister of Defense and one of the founders of the single party of Russia. And we have the monarchy branch with Ramzan Kadyrov as the monarch, alright? So he stabilizes the system, pretty much like the British monarch does. Okay, so now we can actually talk about the PMC, private military company Wagner Mutiny that happened in June 2023. So Wagner is Putin's personal asset, right? Let me clarify this a little bit. So there are no contracts of Wagner with the Ministry of Defense. So it's not subservient to Shoigu. So it's Putin's personal asset. And actually, like, the scandal that has led to mutiny was that Wagner is not subservient to Ministry of Defense. Like, what the hell, what's going on? And obviously they need to be funded somehow. And if not through Ministry of Defense, then how? Well, through Putin himself, right? They're literally funded by, again, literally trucks of cash and actually gold and other valuable stuff. I mean, they also have their own operations in Africa, so they mine their own gold to some degree. Actually, a lot of Africa is under Wagner's control, but that's a whole separate issue. anyways, so literally trucks with cash. So it's a very shady scheme. They're like half of Wagner are criminals, including war criminals, including in Africa and other places. So it's an incredibly shady structure, right? But anyways, after the mutiny, you may remember Putin's complaints that, oh, I've paid them basically billions of dollars, right? And they stabbed me in the back, you know? How unfortunate. So it was all a very, very gray type of funding. Anyways, so Prigozhin, or Prigozhin without accent, is actually a manager of this PMC, Wagner, and also Putin's very, very good friend since the 1990s, actually. And before we speak about Prigozhin, let me tell you about the actual leader. I've said that Prigozhin is like a manager, you know, CEO, if you wish, of Wagner. Who's the actual leader of Wagner? Well, it's the one named Dmitry Utkin, or Dmitry Utkin without accent. So he's a special force operative. And a very colorful person. Maybe I'll show you some photos right now just to show you how colorful he is. So, in one of the photos you may see him with very specific tattoos, let's say, near the neck. You may see very recognizable double S insignia, right? On his chest, you may see a very recognizable eagle, etc., etc. And what is Wagner in the I mean, he obviously loves German culture, if you know what I mean, right? And what is Wagner in the first place? Well, it's the last name of the German's composer, right? Who was very adored by one Austrian painter who was a leader of Germany at some point. And obviously, Utkin, as a big fan of all the German stuff, he just took the call sign of Wagner. So Wagner was his call sign, right? That's why he called his private military company Wagner. And ironically, these are the people who supposedly denazify Ukraine. Oh my God. Also, like, I would love all my conservative Americans who still believe that Ukraine is full of Nazis and Putin is, you know, relieving them from this Nazi rule. What are you, I mean, you're so, I mean, your head is so far down your ass that you probably wouldn't care about what I would say to you. So anyways, yeah. So let's get back to Prigozhin. So Prigozhin met Putin at St. Petersburg restaurant called Staraya Tamozhnya, or Old Customs. And let me tell you about this word a little bit. So in Russian, tamozhnya actually is has only single meaning. It's like this border control, the customs at the border, right? Whereas in English, customs may mean customs like rituals, you know, like the habits. And, well, the thing is, this restaurant, well, okay, let me get back to this in a few sentences down. So they've met in this Old Customs restaurant, right? It was founded in 1996 by a British agent named Anthony William Gear. And in fact, he still works there, among some other places. I'll actually probably link his Instagram page maybe or something. So Putin at that time, when he met Prigozhin there, was just a minor clerk in the administration of St. Petersburg's mayor, Sobchak, Anatoly Sobchak, okay? He was a mayor from 1991 to 1996, I think, something like that. And Prigozhin was a criminal, with a very long record. Like, he had spent like 14 years total or something like that in various prisons. And perhaps again, then they've acquired some homosexual connections between each other, Putin and Prigozhin. I don't know. Like, I haven't been there, okay? But I wouldn't exclude that personally. Like, it would make a lot of sense because, again, a criminal, like, you probably don't know, like, if you're not from Russian-speaking culture, about all the culture of homosexuality in prisons, which again goes way back to Stalin's concentration camps, but it has such a huge influence on all of the Russian culture in modernity, especially, like, you know, late middle to late Soviet period and modern Russia especially. There's a lot of songs about it. There's a lot of, like, the prison riddles are a big thing in Russian culture, etc., etc. So, like, prison homosexuality is a big thing. Again, special, like, intelligence officers homosexuality is a whole other thing. So perhaps, I don't know. Another thing that was possible with regards to that as well is Freemasonry, because again, the British agent in a restaurant called Old Customs, like, if you know about the history of Freemasonry, you know about Old Customs Freemasonry. That's also a thing, okay? Yeah. So in Russian, like, you wouldn't say that Old Customs sounds suspicious, but if you translate it back to English, because the founder is a British agent, well, it kind of makes sense, okay? Alright. So, since then, Prigozhin became one of the most trusted people of Putin, and actually, literally became his personal cook. So he arranged a lot of, special occasions including with American presidents, like Bush was in one of Prigozhin's restaurants with Putin, etc., etc. So, George W. Bush, the younger one. So, yeah. Personal cook, yeah. So one of the most, the closest people. So, finally, we're coming to the mutiny part. So, what was it? Well, in like, everything you know to this point, right? Prigozhin is a very good friend of Putin, like perhaps more than a good friend, if you know what I mean. Putin is not really the main person in Russia, right? So mutiny was an attempt of Putin to bail out. That's my big statement here. Maybe stop the war, maybe blame all of it on his ministers, including Shoigu, the head of the Democratic branch, right? And mind you, he actually tried many times before to bail out. Like in 2012, like he actually funded, I mean, it's not proven, but it's kind of obvious, some of the protests that came in Russia, like people were claiming, well, he's actually at retirement age. Back then it was 60 years old. Ironically, Putin was the one to raise retirement age later. Maybe it was kind of a joke played on him by his masters. But anyways, so he was 60 years old, and they were claiming, well, he's too old to become to work as a president. He should retire, In case you don't remember, like from 2008 to 2012, Medvedev was the president because Putin had his 2 terms, so he had to take a break according to constitution. So Medvedev had 1 term and then 2 terms of Putin again. And in 2020 elections, Putin cannot participate because there were 2 terms before that and also 2 terms before that, but with Medvedev in between, so it was kind of fine. But after 2020, they deliberately, zeroed out, like reset his terms so he could participate again, which was another joke played on him by the administration. So yeah, the changes to constitution have been made. It was called the reset of terms, and by that time you may remember that his fake wife has already left. So he's like, come on guys, I mean stop, like I wanna retire, guys, I wanna bail out, please let me go rest. But again, as you remember from my video, Ukraine Special, in February of 2022, Macron and Scholz, the leaders of France and Germany, like the future leaders of unified Europe, Macron especially, visited him personally. And I mean, the legend goes they were trying to make him not attack Ukraine. However, I think they were actually trying to make him attack Ukraine. They were trying to convince him to attack Ukraine. They were saying, okay, my man, there's one last job for you, and believe me, like after this, we'll set you free. And he said, well, okay. Like if you watch his speech before they've attacked Ukraine, on the February 24th in the morning, like it was played on all the major media, and he said, we've been left no choice. And I think it was sincere. Like he literally was saying, like, they've left me no choice, guys. Like, I mean, like, what can I do? I mean, okay. Like, we're attacking. Fine. Okay. So, yeah. And in March 2023, Macron has shown him that, you know, my man, there's an arrest warrant on you from the International Criminal Court, so it's gonna be hard to bail out. So you gotta go through to the end with this. So probably this mutiny was the last attempt of Putin to bail out, like literally the last one. Like maybe suicide would be the next step, but I'm not sure he will. I mean, he's a very like fearful kind of guy, like a very, what's the word? Well, a coward, right? Cowardly kind of guy. So usually the mutiny ends with what? Either success of the rebels or gallows for them, pretty much, right? But in this case, what we have, nothing, right? So the logical conclusion is that there was no mutiny in the first place. It was just Putin wanting to remove himself with any sort of justification, right? So he literally called his best friend, well, maybe one of his best friends, Prigozhin, and said, please, like, do something. I can't do this anymore, my man. Like, please save me. So Prigozhin took his forces and marched to Moscow. And, like, how did it stop? Well, Ramzan Kadyrov has said, okay, guys, my men are gonna stop this. My men are gonna liberate Rostov. They're gonna liberate all the other places. We're gonna march to Moscow, if you wish. And probably Chechen people in Moscow had found Putin and told him that, you know, Ramzan doesn't like what you're doing. Like, the king is not happy with this. So in the end, Putin had to command Prigozhin to stop. And again, initially there were criminal charges because it's high treason, right? It's a big deal. But all these charges were lifted. All the property was returned. Like, there were literally like a very comedic case when, again, all these trucks with cash, literally trucks with cash, returned to Prigozhin in a very formal manner, actually. Like, nobody knows where this money comes from, but okay, if this is your money, well, go ahead and take it back. Yeah. And there's all the laughter. I mean, in regular Russian opposition, they're laughing at the Chechens right now. They're saying, ha ha ha, all these stupid Chechens, they were they've supposedly tried to liberate Rostov, but they've lost along the way because, well, no fighting ever took place, right? So they didn't actually get neither to Rostov nor to Moscow. Moscow was completely undefended. In fact, Putin gave all the official armed forces officers not to engage with Wagner if they are to, move past them. Obviously, because Putin wanted Wagner to displace him somehow. So, yeah, there were no fighting. I mean, there were like a dozen fighter and helicopter pilots killed by Wagner, which also caused a bit of an outrage in Russian patriotic camp, let's say. But then again, Putin's rule is anti-Russian in the first place. So why would they not notice it by now? I don't know. So these pilots just died for nothing, literally. They died defending an anti-Russian government. So they got what they deserved to some degree. Anyway, so Chechen forces are actually named TikTok forces with regards to this war, at least, because what happens usually is in Ukraine, I mean, what happened at least previously is that Russian forces engage somewhere. They're trying to claim some land. They suffer heavy losses, like incredibly heavy losses. It's a huge grinder, right? But eventually, like in a month or a couple of weeks, they manage to advance. And then the Chechens come. And then they start filming on these stupid TikTok videos, how they are shooting like into the emptiness in some forest, and like, Ahmad Sila, Ahmad Power, like we're so cool. So that's why they're named TikTok forces, because they don't do anything militarily speaking. But then again, it's a parade forces, right? It's the king's guard, essentially. They don't have to fight. Oh, let the slaves, let the Russians die instead of them. So yeah. So Kadyrov convinced Putin that mutiny is a bad idea, And as the end result of that, his pocket army, the Wagner, Putin's pocket army that is, have been mostly disbanded. Like some of them went back to Africa. There's still a lot of operations in Africa by Wagner. Some of them went to Belarus, actually, where I am. Like some of them are stationed like 150 kilometers from here, about so, maybe 200. A lot, like a couple of thousand of them, including Utkin, by the way, the Wagner guy, including Prigozhin himself. And Putin, what did he do after that? He immediately went to Caucasus, to Chechnya and other nearby places, to pledge loyalty again, essentially, to the king. And he was like hugging people in the streets there openly, even though it was a stark contrast, because literally like a couple of weeks before that, there were a meeting, basically he was giga paranoid about meeting anyone in person. So any journalist that wanted to meet him had to go through 2 weeks of quarantine, do all kinds of tests, including the feces tests and all kinds of interesting stuff. So, but then he just randomly hugged random people in the streets. On June 28th, I think it was his trip to Caucasus, or 26th. So basically a couple of days after the mutiny, after it ended. Because again, he needed to show signs of loyalty because the monarch wasn't happy with the mutiny. So, and again, there were a very wide covering in the media that His Majesty Ramzan Kadyrov, the monarch of Russia, the king of Chechnya, went on vacation on July 3rd, and it was deliberately underlined as planned. Okay, so it was his yearly planned vacation. And it was so widely covered by media in Russia that even I knew about it, even though I'm not even reading Russian media, right? So the story goes about the mutiny of Wagner / Putin trying to remove himself is that the king, Ramzan, has suppressed Prime Minister Putin's mutiny and went to rest. The system is stable, nothing to see here. Move along. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.
If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.